To everyone to this webinar. We thank you. You have accepted this invitation and we'll start in a few minutes. Thank you very much.
Hola, muy buenos días, muy buenas tardes,
Good
dependiendo.
morning, good afternoon, depending on the place you are. Welcome to this webinar, Pedagogies for an Education with Gender Perspective. First of all, we'd like to give you some housekeeping data. In order to strengthen multiculturalism, we have asked the speakers to give the talk in their mother tongue, understanding the diversity of audience from different regions. Therefore, for the people attending us, we will have simultaneous interpretation in Spanish, English, and French. Then you will have to select the interpretation channel button at the taskbar. Please remember this session will be recorded. We thank all the participants and the speakers who kindly have accepted this instance. You are kindly invited to introduce yourself with your name and with your institution using the chat function of the platform. You can also add your questions. The webinar Pedagogies for Agenda Equality Pedagogy is developed within a context which is the practice community of PICS perspective of gender equality in the region in public education. The gender community goal is to facilitate meeting in spaces so that the representatives from different countries can share experiences, mobilize knowledge, and particularly reflect upon the problem of gender in the region. Today, we'll have a reflection table on the role of the teachers for the development of pedagogies with gender equality. This table, and we have the pleasure to have two academics from the region, Dr. Chamay Visisar from the University of Guyana and Dr. Andrea Lira, a scholar from the University of Chile. We thank you both. It's such a pleasure to have you here. Without further ado, we'll start now with the first presentation by Andrea Lira. Andrea is a professor of primary education. He was a director for 10 years, principal of a school in Santiago de Chile, and he developed studies of master's degree and PhD at New York, Columbia University, specializing in communication in education and curriculum and teaching. Currently, she works training, teaches in education, and develops and conducts research on gender and interculturality in education. And in the knowledge construction, her lecture is Come in Conversation, Initial Conversations and Conceptual Distinction of Feminism in Education. please, what was your Andrea? I got two mother tongues. I will present in English because I thought English will be more understood. I don't know if it will be like that. The PPT is in English, but since we have interpreters, I will give my lecture in English.
Con el PPT, yo les voy a hablar un poco, creo que ya... A ver cómo agrando.
Let me see if I can zoom in. Okay, you have already...
Ana Luisa, about feminist education policies and where these stories come from, and the history of feminist education policy in Chile. So I'm just going to give a little bit of clarity on some conceptual distinctions that are in the paper, but also have some discussion, hopefully, with everybody here afterwards about your thoughts and ideas about what this means for education and for teacher education specifically. So I want to start with this video, which I have here. If somebody could. You might be familiar with it. It's a video made by a poet and a cinematographer about gender. So please let me know, Maciel, if you can hear it.
Andrea, yo lo escucho, pero no lo veo.
Or blue?
Ok, déjame.
No sé si el resto lo podía ver, Fernanda.
Could anybody see the video? No, I guess that everyone was just watching listening to the sound, but could not watch the video. So we'll try it again.
Ahí sí.
Pink or blue? Pink or blue? Pink or blue? Go. Baby grows for blue with robots on. Baby grows for pink, no robots on. Baby grows for pink with flowers on. Baby grows for blue, no flowers on. Little pink picks a daisy chain. Great. Little blue picks a daisy chain. Gay. Little blue climbs a tree. Strong boy. Little pink climbs a tree. Tomboy. Pink falls down. Pink is given more hugs. Pink tears are loud. Blue tears must man up. Grow some bollocks, toughen up. Don't be such a girl, blue. Now blue hair is cut short. Pink hair is let long. Pink is given toy dolls. Blue is given toy guns. Pink is told to be cute. Blue is told to be bigger. Pink shoes, no grip. Blue shoes, no glitter. Now blue legs start growing hair and pink legs start growing hair. Blue is told it's manly, pink is told to shave theirs. Blue is shown as blood, in action, films, fights, pride. Pink starts bleeding every month, told blood, shh, shame, hide. Pink discovers lust, wrong. Blue discovers lust, nice. Now blue is called a player, but pink is called a sket. Pink is told they glow, but blue is told they sweat. Blue is told they wank, pink is told they sin. Or blue is called a pussy, pink is called a bitch. Now pink is told to be a lady, do not spit, swear, smell. Blue is told to be a man, do not cry or ask for help. Blue is told to man up, pink is told to make up. Blue is told to stay strong, pink is told to stay young. Blue is told to get rich, pink is told to want kids. Blue is told they mansplain, pink is told they gossip. Blue is told they're bosses, pink is told they're bossy. Blue is given breakdowns, pink is given Botox. Cunnilingus is censored more than rape scenes or blowjobs. Blue is told, this makes a man. Pink is told, this makes a girl. Babies born in naked flesh, welcome to the world.
Okay, so we're going to talk, or I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about how we come to construct these ideas of gender and the consequences. And the idea is to talk about three conceptual distinctions that are significant to how we come to think about genders in the way that we do. And so this video is just a little introduction, I think, to bring up some things that have consequences for how each of us grew up, and then how we think about education and what we're doing in education about these ideas of gender, and also the resistance to questioning these structures that we are living in. And so first, I want to talk about why feminism and why I want to talk to you guys about feminism. So it's different for me to think about gender and gender ideas and gender theories versus talking about feminism. So feminism, there are a lot of feminisms, but it's based on a critique of patriarchal culture and this idea of institutionalization of sexist violence that builds and reproduces gender inequalities. And so feminism provides us the lens to understand these patriarchal structures from a point of critique, right? And so as we wrote in the paper, there are many understandings of feminism and many branches of feminism and many ways in which we think about feminism. But the main distinction I want to make is there's one liberal feminism that tends to focuses on equal participation, right? And that's the one I think that's broadest in when we're thinking about education and when we're thinking about policy. It's the one that occupies most of the discourse. And so it's this idea that if we get women to have equal participation in structures of power, then that's the goal, right? Versus other ways of understanding feminism and gender that critique this idea of participation and equality as what we're striving for, versus understanding the structures of violence that perpetuate inequality and the very structures that compose the ways we think about gender. So that's the main distinction I want to talk about, is not looking for equal participation and maintaining a structure of violence, only including participation of women, but thinking about how we come to structure and think about ideas of gender, right? And so it's through this, we get to, it's like putting on a pair of glasses to look at how we're living and what we're doing, recognize the structures of patriarchy, identify it as a problem, because, and especially when we're thinking about this paper that we wrote with Annalisa, not necessarily, these structures of patriarchy are not necessarily recognized as a problem by policymakers, by the families we work with in schools, right? So one thing is to recognize the structure of patriarchy and then to identify it as a problem and not just as a common sense way in which we are living. And understand it as a process of institutionalization, which means that it's a system where the bureaucracy, the ways in which we classify, the ways in which we function, create these ways in which we get to grow up, the ways in which we move through space. And that is institutionalized in schools are a major part of that process, right? So naming it is the goal, identifying it as a problem, recognizing the structures. When we wrote this paper, there was a huge call in Chile for an anti-sexist education, but there was little clarity, or there were a lot of ways, different ways in which we understood what that means to have an anti-sexist education, right? And so when we are thinking about an anti-sexist education, a feminist education, there are two key concepts that we need to understand. One is this idea of hegemonic masculinity, which is very present in the video that I just showed. And the second one is an intersectional view of what it means to think about feminism, to think about patriarchy, to think about the systems in which we are in. And so I want to talk about what we mean first by looking from a feminist lens and what we understand by patriarchy. I'm sorry, I'm going super fast, but like I have the timing here, it's almost 10 minutes. So patriarchy is a system of domination, right? So that's where we're starting from. And so in this domination, it relies on thinking that some part of humanity is superior and the other one is inferior. And in the case of patriarchy, so this is men and male gender is superior, is stronger or smarter, or a lot of these binaries that comes up in comparison to women. And so that gives a reason, a justification for the rule of men over women. And this patriarchy is more complex. This quote by Bell Hooks, who is an was an African-American scholar. She's also talking about in relation to white supremacy, imperialism. And so the system of domination combines. It's not only women over men, it's also white people over others. It's also imperialism. It's a system that works in conjunction with others. And so first, understanding hegemonic masculinity. And so when we think about hegemonic masculinity, it's a system that classifies bodies according to two genders, right? And so when we're thinking about gender, we're thinking about like a thread that is made of three different threads that intertwine together. So we have sex, gender identity, and desire. In hegemonic masculinity, sex, gender identity, and desire are aligned, right? So we have the sex, which is the biological. And so if you have a penis, then your gender identity is male or is being a man. And then that comes with a desire that is supposed to be the desired sexual desire is that you're heterosexual, right? And so when we think about masculinity, that's the correct way to be a man, right? So your sex aligns with your gender identity, and then you are also heterosexual. And that's what's privileged, and that's what's right, and that's what's correct. When we look at this as a system of power, right, it's important to undo those threads. So understand that sex, your biological sex, is different from your gender identity, which is what you feel like, right? You feel like a man, you feel like a woman, you feel like other, non-binary, or it's a spectrum of gender, right? And then your desire is separate from that. So what your sexual desires are, what you're attracted to, what you like to do, is different from your gender identity, right? So those are the three like key threads that we need to separate when we're understanding hegemonic masculinity. And so hegemonic masculinity is a system of oppression that forces people or wants people to fit into these categories of what it is to be male, what it is to be female, what you should desire, what you should feel like, that privileges men, but also limits what they can do. So as we saw in the video, it's a specific way of being a man. And so the system of patriarchy based on this idea of hegemonic masculinity limits both men and women to what they should be, right? And so it's damaging for both, even though it gives power to men, right? And so when we're talking about these systems of oppression, systems of domination, that Bell Hooks uses the term patriarchy to understand these systems of domination, we have to understand it in an intersectional way, which means that this is there's not only one system of oppression and power that functions. So gender is not separate from race. It's not separate from how we understand the first world or the third world, who gets to dominate who, right? So when we're thinking about gender and we're thinking about feminism and we're thinking about education specifically, and that's why liberal feminism, I feel like, is not enough, right? Because when you're only looking for the participation of women in equal conditions with men, you're forgetting all the other systems of oppression, right? So when we're thinking about participation as the goal or representation as the goal, you're maintaining these structures of hegemonic masculinity, you're maintaining these structures of domination, only including women in the the structures of domination, right? And so when we're thinking about these structures of domination, and we understand that patriarchy is aligned with white supremacism and is aligned with imperialism and is aligned with colonialism, we need to understand these structures of power as interrelated. So we can't think about hegemonic masculinity and not think about race, for example. And so when we're thinking about hegemonic masculinity and what it means to be a man, those ideas of what it means to be a man give domination to the white man, right? To this idea of whiteness as justification for domination. Okay, so we're at 15 minutes. I want to stop here. I hope it wasn't too fast, and then we can have a conversation afterwards and get a little bit more into these ideas of patriarchy, feminism, and specifically how you guys are thinking about working with teachers.
Muchas gracias, Andrea, por la presentación.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for your presentation. It's extremely important, and it provides just a picture, a more generic picture when we refer to domination and patriarchy and how we can reflect upon this, and how this is translated into education, how we can reproduce this sexist violence, these power roles. Thank you very much. Very interesting. At the end of the lectures, we'll have some time for discussion where we'll be able to ask questions and reflect upon that. And now we'll have our next speaker, who is Dr. Charmaine. This is Chap. She's now the director for the excellence of teaching and learning, and she's now the director of educational support system online. She's a professor of the University of Guyana, where she teaches in post-degree and doctoral study. She's member of the Higher Education Academy. She has presented in regional and world lectures. She has broadly written on education, gender focus. Her publication is added to the scarce empiric data research. Today's we have gender perspective in public education. That will be her lecture. Welcome, Jermaine. Thank you very much. And now the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, everyone, for the warm invitation. Good morning, everyone. All protocols duly observed. Could you get my secretary? Could you allow my secretary to share the screen? Okay, thank you. Okay, so I would like to thank the Kickslap community for asking me to present on the topic, gender perspectives in public education. Next slide, please. In order to respond to the questions, I have created 3 objectives. I will try to align conflict theory with inequality in schools. I will try to link critical feminist pedagogy with gender equality, and I will identify tips and techniques to engender equality in schools. So first of all, next slide. I want to talk about conflict theories. Conflict theorists believe that educational institutions operate as mechanisms for the social reproduction of equality. Inequality is continually socially reproduced because the whole education system is controlled by a dominant group ideology. The premise that education fosters equal opportunity is regarded as a myth perpetuated to serve the interests of the dominant classes. This is the belief of conflict theorists. According to this myth, those who fail to achieve success have only themselves to blame. These theorists view this myth as being obscure, but it is important because it results in the individual failures of many students can be explained by large-scale social forces, where those who are in control oppress those beneath them. So conflict theorists argue that schools, like society in general, are based on exploitation, oppression, domination, and subordination. They also maintain that schools are a means to convey to students what constitutes knowledge and appropriate behavior as determined by those in power. Not only are schools controlled by the dominant ideology, but classrooms and what occurs within them are controlled by teachers. If teachers believe in equality and perpetuate this through their practices, the attention given to each student and equalities that they emulate, equality will be learned. Therefore, teachers have the critical responsibility of engendering equality within the classroom and ensuring that they practice and demonstrate equality. However, the reverse can occur. Evidence indicates that education's democratic mission has failed. Rather than overcoming inequality, the educational system appears to reinforce it. Inequality is continually socially reproduced because the whole education system serves the interests of the dominant classes. Now, this is according to the conflict theorists. Next slide, please. Now, let's talk about schools and socializations. According to conflict theorists, children from lower class backgrounds face a much tougher time in school and they must learn the standard curriculum as well as the hidden curriculum of the middle class values. Schools play a significant role in the socialization of youth of any country. However, they can also be sites for the production and reproduction of social inequalities and destructive discriminatory attitudes. From teaching style to the formal curriculum, schools are a means to convey what constitutes knowledge and appropriate behavior as determined by those in power. Thus, students must learn not only basic skills such as reading, writing, and math, but also skills useful in a capitalist economy and behaviors appropriate to the work environment, especially docility and obedience to a manager or boss, in this case, the teacher. Next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about tacit and explicit normalizing of gender equalities. And I think the previous speaker did an excellent job of showing how the gender equalities are normalized or not normalized. So schools take part in the process of implicitly legitimizing and reinforcing harmful gender norms through tacit or explicit approval of the status quo. This is according to the United Nations Gender Education Initiative and United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, 2013. Next slide. The hidden, formal, and informal curricula is responsible for either engendering gender equality or inequality. So the teacher is the sole responsibility, is responsible for all three of the curricula. And how the teacher uses his or her authority in the classroom illustrates these curricula at which students learn these different curricula, including the hidden curriculum, which could promote inequalities in schools, where students subsume their enculturation in favor of the more dominant school teacher culture. The teacher is also a reflection of the microcosm of the macrocosm. Therefore, the teacher mimics the expected norms and values in the society in which he or she exists. And these are transferred to the students. Next slide. Educational transformation and gender equality. Just as teachers are able to inculcate inequalities, they can also contribute to gender equality. Equality in the learning process means that boys and girls receive equitable treatment and attention and have equal opportunities to learn. This means that girls and boys are exposed to the same curriculum, although the coursework may be taught differently to accommodate their different learning styles. Equality in the learning process also means that learners should be exposed to teaching methods and materials that are free of stereotypes and gender bias. In addition, it means that boys and girls should have the freedom to learn, explore, and develop skills in all academic and extracurricular offerings. Next slide.
Tremaine, I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you please come closer to the mic because the interpreters can hear loud enough so they can
Oh, okay. Thanks.
okay,
I'll wait for
translate. Thank you.
volume as well. Thank
I
you.
think that
It's very
that's okay.
important.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So based on the work by Paulo Freire, critical feminist pedagogy refers to a fusion of critical and feminist pedagogies that enable boys and girls to develop a feminist consciousness by raising their critical awareness of oppressive social norms, power structures, traditions, and the gender relations that impact them. Critical feminist pedagogy is concerned with how education creates and entrenches existing structures of power and seeks to provide practical tools for redressing inequality both within the classroom and in the society at large. Critical pedagogy seeks to investigate the ways education creates and enforces class division under capitalism. Feminist critical pedagogy additionally seeks to explore how gender inequality is perpetuated through educational systems and offers liberatory educational alternatives that endeavor to create social change. This is according to Shaw and Freire, 1990. According to Zeev, 2015, feminism offers a lens that allows us to analyze and understand phenomena in the social world through recognizing the hierarchical nature of gender under patriarchy. Next slide. I'm almost finished. With the aforementioned in mind, critical feminist pedagogy seeks to explore how the marginalization and othering, according to de Beauvoir, 2001, of women takes place through specific educational practices, such as gender-based curricula, hidden and overt messages given to students, and the effect of instructional style on boys and girls. Critical feminist pedagogy seeks to promote equality between different groups in society through education and expose the mechanisms in education that marginalize certain groups. USAID indicated that critical feminists look for answers to questions such as, what hidden forces of discrimination continue to act against children from different backgrounds? How can they be transformed? What is the impact of the social structure and power hierarchy in our educational institutions? What kind of message does our organic forces continue to control the atmosphere in the school and the content of the curriculum? Whose voices are absent from our curriculum? Whose interests are served by our educational system and the dominant discourses of education that it reflects? Next slide. So now I want to leave you with some tips for enabling equality in the learning process according to USAID. USAID suggests that there should be training for curriculum developers, textbook writers, administrators, managers, and teachers in gender awareness prior to developing new curriculum. Additionally, teachers should be trained in inclusive teaching practices to help them integrate students who have been marginalized due to poverty, ethnicity, language, or gender discrimination. Administrators should monitor teachers' interactions with boys and girls to ensure equitable student treatment. And finally, USAID suggested that policies geared towards encouraging both genders in all areas of studies, especially STEM and STEAM, should be created. Next slide. Now, I want to leave you with some tips for enabling equality in the learning outcomes. USAID indicated that we should train teachers to understand how their perceptions or expectations of male and female students may influence how they assess students' progress, mark examinations, and provide feedback. When we are giving exam questions, we should use different methods. We should use prose, diagrams, charts, pictures, and tables so that we cater to the diverse students' diverse learning styles. As additionally, for questions, we should ensure that we use multiple choice questions, essay type questions, short answer questions, so that we cater equally to both genders, and we should weigh the test items so that there's equal opportunity for both genders to perform well. We should also balance classroom assessment methods to evaluate group and individual work, as well as verbal and written evaluation tools. Additionally, teachers should review existing tests, examinations, and assessments to determine whether the examples and language used are free of gender bias and stereotypes. They should remove any gender-specific content and ensure that examples reflect a balance in girls' and boys' experiences. Next slide. And finally, I want to leave you with some activities to increase students' awareness and ensure gender mainstreaming. Simulation and role-play exercises, such as viewing the world from the perspective of the other gender, is important. And Robert Gordon has a very good lesson plans on how we can implement them, gender awareness and sensitivity in our classroom. Storytelling is another form of engendering gender sensitivity, and it is recommended that we use the story of the fox and the crane to tell the story, to make students more sensitized to gender differences. All right, and of course, documentaries are very good, and I'm going to put, if I can later on, I'll put 2 in the chat. For example, interviews with students, and there's another very good one, and Inspiring the Future, Redraw the Balance. So there are 2 interviews with students. And lastly, Robert Gordon has one called Agenda Lightbulb Moment, when he asked students to go back to think about the earliest memory of when they realized they were treated differently based on their gender. So these are some activities that students can use, teachers can use, sorry, to make students more aware of the gender and how they're treated differently as a result, and maybe help bridge that gap. So next slide. What strategies would you recommend? And these are my references. And I would like to thank you for giving me your time and for allowing me to do this presentation. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias,
Thank you
Charmaine.
very much, Charmaine. Really interesting presentation, especially with how concrete you gave these recommendations and these examples, practical examples that you gave for the classroom. We agree that training for all of the stakeholders in education is fundamental if we want to change the current practices and if we want to stop reproducing sexist practices. So thank you very much. Now we will open the conversation. We will open the floor for questions, observations, or comments for our lecturers. So please, the floor is open for everyone. I cannot see you all, so just open your mic and ask your question or make your comment. Is there anyone willing to share comments, opinions? So meanwhile, I want to thank the 2 speakers. I want to start with a question for Andrea. Can you tell us, please, or explain how you address this from the educational systems. So first, how? How have you seen that these educational systems are reproduced in this patriarchal structure that you have talked about, and how? How do you think this could be worked from teacher training or from different pedagogies in order to have a non-sexist pedagogy? Could you please tell us about that?
Gracias, Fernanda. Voy a hablar en castellano.
Thank you, Fernanda. I will speak Spanish.
Bueno, a ver. Creo que es súper importante
I believe it is really important to
estamos
understand
funcionando
that
en la
we are
sociedad
working in a system which as a whole,
¿Se escucha? Ya. De, que funciona como
that
dentro de
works
este
within this patriarchy, capitalist, imperialist system. So there it is where our educational system is working or is in. So pedagogy, anti-sexist or feminist pedagogy, it is going to be resisting that system, against that system. So that is fundamental to understand, because when we're talking about teachers training within that system, there will always be a resistance, a fight, and it will have a cost, therefore, because there is resistance there, and that cost could be, I mean, and I see it in Magallanes, where I work. It is one part of Chile which is smaller in the southern part, so this feminist resistance, it is visible there and it has some costs, especially for the hiring of feminist teachers. They are fired sometimes, so it is important to understand that this resistance has a cost. So, complementing what Charmaine is saying, yes, it is important to have strategies, but it is also important to acknowledge that those strategies, when they're against the patriarchal system, they have a cost associated to it. When we're talking about from liberal feminism and we're talking about participation, which is equitative, it is not the same of being anti-sexist or feminist. Equitative participation maintains this participation in the system. It is not resistant, it is just an adjustment. So it is not destroying the structure. One of the structures that destroys anti-sexist feminism is the idea that there are two genders. So therefore, when one, it is a participation of women, just like with equality with men, when we know and when we acknowledge that there are more than two genders and they may operate differently and they may have different desires or wishes, different ways of expression, there we are having a problem. We acknowledge, and this must be common in Latin America and in the world. So violence we see now against this gender status and against different expressions of gender, especially for transgender people, we see there is resistance there, and the resistance that may come because you ask me, how does it work, right? So one of the things that, I mean, how it works, which is so complex for teaching, it is, I mean, families and parents, how families accept these strategies that may be implemented by teachers. So when we think of flexibility for these different gender identities, different ways of being, different ways of existing and acknowledging the patriarchal structures on a daily basis in the family, the roles that mothers and fathers or grandmas and grandpas have, uncles and aunts, there's resistance from the family. There's also resistance coming from the authorities in the same school where you're working at. And also the bigger structure that has to do with the education ministry, curriculum, as Sherman just said. So those are decisions which are so important to make. One, it is the search of participation, equalitarian, and the resistance towards ideas on how we build these different bodies. So when we're talking about resistance, the idea of how we rebuild these bodies, we're talking about resistance to capitalism, imperialism, and patriarchy, all of those things. And that resistance has a cost. It is not easy. It is not for free. So when we talk about teachers training, it's important to include all of those elements and we need to make the distinction because to do so, we need to get prepared with tools, not only to what to do in the classroom, but also how to have strategies to survive in that resistance, self-care, management, conflict management, and many other things. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. Interesting. Celia wanted to mention something. So Celia, the floor is all yours. Do you have a question or maybe observation? Good morning. It is not a question, but we couldn't really listen to it. I couldn't listen, but I solved it. Alberto, the floor is yours. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be with you all, sharing these experiences about this important topic in education. I just want to, this is not a question, but this is basically an experience, a situation. Here in El Salvador, in our education, we recently had, since January the 1st, a reform on this law for first infancy. And a law, it is deleted and there's a new one with a different approach. But our biggest concern for teachers here all over the country is that there's an advancement, important advancement in terms of gender equality. Within these relationships, educational relationships, and these relationships, which are social. So we felt we're advancing on that topic. It is still a taboo. It is still a hard topic, as it's been mentioned already in this presentation, but at least we could address it. We could talk about it more openly, especially in these sexual preferences of boys and girls. We could talk about that in the classroom, but with this new reform that I'm telling you about, the education ministry mandates since last year, by the end of 2022, they mandate to safeguard all of the material related to gender. We're really concerned. We're worried. We have felt as a magistrate that we are having a setback. I mean, this year that we have already started, I mean, we're talking about gender equality. I mean, we won't be able to talk about that because there used to be platforms at the education ministry. There were topics, and due to an equality gender topic, and because of the approach of San Argentinian colleagues, I mean, it was topic number 7 of unit number 6 of social studies, 6th grade, where they tackled that topic of sexual freedom for children. So that was the element that triggered all of the situation. It triggered everything, and therefore they took away from us all of the material that we had. They blocked, they stopped all of the platforms talking about gender equality, the printed material. I mean, it was something like it was the Middle Ages. So the only missing thing was to burn all that material at the public square. So as a magistrate here in El Salvador, we're really concerned about this topic because we cannot talk about that topic anymore. We're afraid now. We're afraid, I mean, on how we're going to address this if the Ministry of Education in its policy, it is going back on this topic and there's no guidelines. So therefore, that it is a problem for us here in El Salvador. And it is really hard, a really hard situation because we had advanced so much about this topic. We had some freedom in order to talk about, we could talk about this topic with children in the classroom and also their parents. And now it's going to be really hard to talk about this topic. So through these organizations, I don't know, could you please give us some guidelines to the state, just to, I don't know, to think about the way they're going to approach this topic. Thank you very much. May I say something? I mean, thank you, Alberto, because I believe that this different, I mean, at different levels, it is happening all over Latin America. What you're telling, I mean, I'm impressed about that. I'm impressed with the level of repression, but in different manners, this repression it is going to advance in Latin America as an answer to these former changes. Because this feeling, this sensation that we're advancing, that now we can talk about different topics related to gender, it gets to its border when we get to equality and equality. And when we talk about gender, and when we talk about the possibility of choosing our gender, I mean, repression starts. So I feel that, or my recommendation in general terms, it is using these spaces in order to create joint strategies for resistance, conversation strategies, in order to see what to do. Because when there is repression from the state, and in Latin America, we have many different examples of state repression, the social organization is so important. So we need to create connections, conversations. We need to develop joint strategies. And this could be, I don't know, a suggestion for our next workshop. We should talk about strategies, collective strategies to think on what to do. Because when we see these recommendations by organizations that should remain presented, when they are, when they talk about equality, I mean, everything works in the classroom. When you go beyond, there is resistance. So it is important to create some collective strategies in order to know how to do it, how to find some different spaces, how to have answers when there is repression from the state, especially for the things that are done in the classroom. So therefore, I was telling you, when we think about teaching training, we also need to think about the responsibility that we have when we are delivering and conveying these ideas, when we're talking about these ideas with all of our students. We need to get prepared for that resistance. And that preparation needs to be collective. It cannot be individual. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Alberto, for sharing your experience. I mean, these spaces are basically to do this, to share experiences. We have the great advantage that we could meet different countries of the region. And there, we want to understand what unites us because we have common problems, especially when talking about gender. We're talking about domination, basically. We're finishing our webinar, but nevertheless, I want to give the floor to you because there might be some comments or questions about what we've talked about. You can just open your mic because I cannot see you all. I am Mr. Palomares from Mexico City, from a public school. I work with preschool teachers. So now I am advising one student. So one of the things we have found is how to do it. The strategies, how to design interventions for teachers. And we discovered a huge resistance from parents. So how? That's it. We see that women are building their identity for the 21st century. And this design that done by Rousseau, where there is equality for women, it is moving. And now UNESCO is talking about a new social contract where women have an incidence in the future. The curious thing here is this 21st century is giving us some guidelines in order to build this masculine identity or how to understand being a man. Getting away, getting stripped from these hegemonies, majorities and minorities. So this is an important debate. Who's going to build that men's identity, fathers or mothers? How is that paternity being built? And we discovered in this work with our preschool teachers, I mean, it's really hard to do it if we don't have the proper information and knowledge of the different specialists, understanding all of the different contexts. So now in Mexico City, we see migration. We're receiving migration from Central America because it is easier to cross the border. And we're seeing more people in Mexico City and different states. And there is a richness of cultures, but also there is a different way of observing this gender identity and how to build a family. And this huge movement, which has been there for more than 100 years, we're talking about this hegemony, It is now getting to a legal framework. So when I ask them how they see this, they have these problems. I mean, specialists don't really know how to create some public policies for it. So over there, if we could, with some data and with empiric evidence, as Alberto just mentioned, if we could help different international bodies, but also at a national level, we could also share and contribute for each gender, but above, or especially these new generations, have the possibility to build their own identity, but also solving these minorities and majorities problems with all of those different examiners. And it was mentioned also, I mean, this patriarchal system, which is getting weaker and weaker. Men are understanding that there are things that are not working properly, and therefore we need to contribute or help. More than being a question of power in this day-to-day activities, how can we build a different world? And that's what I wanted to comment and tell you. Teachers, preschool teachers, have a greater responsibility for the design of the future. So it would be important to have these adult conversations. We should help them so they, what Montessori once said, this, we should put adults up and children's down in order to validate the empirical evidence, in order to build more robust construction, because due to inertia, we replicate old systems, which sometimes, and sometimes we don't really understand what's happening. So there, I feel that this dialogue may contribute with, in order to give or provide information, knowledge from. So from the context of the countries, we could solve this future, which is harder and harder. But I also feel that these new generations are asking with this digitalization that information should be available, knowledge and the experience of each generation. It would be important to build not only strategies, but also political public policies which are more robust. So we can have a dialogue amongst countries. So we have the certainty that we're on the right path. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing. We are almost out of time. So Marta, the floor is yours. Well then, I just want to give an opinion related to the topic we have talked about, which is, it is an important topic. We're talking about policies here. We're within a society which is patriarchal and capitalist. There's no doubt about it. In our case, as it was mentioned by Alberto, in El Salvador, we have public policies which are defined for doing a conditioning or in order to uh, submit or to dominate the population. So it is important, I mean, as I think, we should apply education or use education not far away from reality. In our case, in our country, so how can we eliminate these small steps that happened? We used to talk about families, not only the functional family, mother, father. We were talking about families which were where there were two fathers or two mothers. So over here, we did not tackle the topic of how many women are single with all of the problems related to education and bringing up of children. So all of that, I mean, mothers fight for their children, but what about the rest of the society? The rest of the society is not helping those mothers. So my point is, how can we, which is a big concern for me, how we are going to start or continue with that struggle, that fight between education, culture, and policies? Because basically, we have cultural levels, which instead of reinforcing our identity, they denaturalize us. So we start I mean, the problem that we're going to have at schools is that they're going to reinforce stigmatization. They're going to reinforce that value judgment related to supporting, or in order to support the existence of these two genders, women and men. There's nothing else. So here we're trying to close the eyes of children to a reality that it is there. It is like saying, I mean, virtuality, it doesn't exist. It's like saying you live two worlds, the real one and the virtual one, right? We cannot deny that. So I'm really concerned about how we are going to fight this monster, which are governments, not only in my country, but all over Latin America. How we're going to fight them, because stigmatization, it is not only related to bullying, there's also punishment, virtual punishment. I mean, people are killed in the virtual world, and that is really concerning. And what Noé also mentioned, we need to come back to these parent schools, but in order to create alliances, and also in order to try to build a profile of what we are, not only as fathers and mothers, but as we are as human beings and persons. So that would be an idea which could be quite feasible to do. Thank you. Thank you very much, Martha. Thank you for your comments. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but right now we're going to have a workshop where we can go, we can keep on talking about these topics. We can go deeper into them. And now, in order to finish, I will give the floor to Jenny Rivas, the gender manager of El Salvador. She's going to close this webinar. Thank you. We have met the goal of this webinar. Can you hear me?
Desde Andrea nos puso todo el contexto.
Andrea gave us all the context. She spoke about the feminist theorists. She talked about the patriarchy context, but I go deeper into it. Chapman also referred to the hidden curriculum, the different type of curriculum, but the most enriching, well, everything is enriching, but they are the speakers, give us their studies, their perspective, referring to what they've been working on. What's enriching besides that lecture is the discussion we held. Alberto, Noé, and the rest, and everybody who spoke gave us their reflection. It is important to put the perspective on the childhood, on the school, this practice community. We were inviting you through the chat, and we were saying how, as a practice community, those countries who have made more progress, those who has gone through these barriers, those who have evolved, how we work on these, not only from participation, I was referring to the participation, to the feminism, the participative feminism, how can we make more progress? El Salvador has done what Chile has done before, Mexico, how all together as practice community can support each other to fight this conflict, providing the best solution on opportunity, education opportunity, equality for students. Due to time, I won't go into detail, but your discussion by thanking Andrea, Germaine, and all the people who has been with us. Please join the practice community so that we all together can